Hello and welcome to this presentation in the Oklahoma State Historic Preservation Office's Spring Workshop Series. We will be discussing best submittal practices today. I'm Kristina Wyckoff. I am the Section 106 Coordinator and Historical Archaeologist.
I am Michael Mays. I'm the National Register Coordinator for OKSHPO.
And we will, be discussing a few different resources or forms that you could be submitting to our office and the best way to do that. So a quick overview of what we will discuss in this presentation. We'll be talking about your Section 106 submittals. We'll be talking about submittals under the executive order for the energy emergency. We'll be discussing resource forms, specifically the Historic Preservation Resource Identification Forms and Archaeological Site Survey Forms, and National Register nomination forms. And so I will go ahead and get started with Section 106 submittals. We've included a number of handouts, which you can find at the right-hand side of your screen. These include our SHPO consultation form, which is essentially a helpful checklist for everything that we need to receive for a Section 106 submittal. We also have our quick guide and a map checklist. Please feel free to download any of these resources at any point throughout the presentation, and please do send us any questions that you have as we go along. So basically, in order to review your Section 106 submittal, we need the most critical information we need is the location, the description, a clear map, and any information on known properties in your area of potential effect. So we need to know where the project is, what the project is, we need to be able to see the location, and we'd like to know if there are any resources that we need to be reviewing. For your location, we definitely need the county. That's how our office tracks all of these projects. They're all organized by county. So please always give us the county within which your project is located. Provide the legal location if possible. That's the township, range, and section or sections within which your project is located. You may also be able to just provide the street address or GPS coordinates. Street addresses are great, though we will say sometimes in rural locations, they may not always get us to the same location that you're trying to depict. So it is really helpful if you also include GPS coordinates. And I love to see those in decimal degrees to 6 decimal points is wonderful. In your project description, be sure to tell us what the project will entail. Include an explanation of whether or not there's any ground disturbance, and I really do mean any. If there's going to be any upturned soil, just let us know, and then we'll make sure that the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey is also reviewing your project. It's really helpful to have that information up front so you don't end up at the last minute having to resubmit to their office to make sure there are no archaeological resources that might be impacted by your project. If your project is constructing something, a building or a structure, it can be really helpful to us to know what the height of that resource would be, or of that property, whatever you're building would be, so that we know visually what kind of visual impacts to anticipate from that. So if there's a new transmission line, for instance, and you're going to be replacing transmission structures with much taller structures, please do tell us what the existing height is and what the new height will be, that sort of information. If we get that up front, then we don't have to send you a request for additional information. We can just complete our review. And a map. Please make sure that you're sending us a clear map. Your map should, I prefer to see an aerial. The archaeological survey will need to see a topographic map because that's the way that they have the site files recorded. So both of those are wonderful, but please do send us an aerial and please show on the aerial the limits of your area of potential effect, the limits of your study area, project area, location. If you don't send us a boundary, then we have to guess, and we'll probably be looking at resources that are outside of the area you intended, which can create some confusion. So if you can be clear, that's more helpful. It's useful if the map outline if the boundary lines could be visible in black and white, but red is a great outline, and I know the Archaeological Survey likes to see site boundaries in red. Um, so I guess I should say maybe don't put your APE in red. Put your APE in a different color so that it's distinguished from an archaeological site if you have sites in your project area. Make sure up north is up, and if it isn't, make sure that there's a north arrow, a scale, and location information that are included on the map image in addition to your letter. Sometimes we'll get a map that seems to have actually been part of a different project. So it's really helpful if the map itself contains some information about the project, maybe the project name, the street address, or GPS coordinates. So if we've got your map showing your area of potential effect, we also want to know, are there any resources in that area of potential effect? Do you know of any historic properties, that would be National Register listed or eligible properties that are within your area of potential effect? Do you know of any archaeological sites that are already present in your area of potential effect? And if you don't have that information, that's fine. But if you do know it, please include it. Also, if there are any existing buildings or structures that are in your area of potential effect, we do need to know that, and we need to know how old they are. Because if you have any existing buildings or structures or bridges that are 45 years of age or older, then our office does require some documentation of those resources so that we can complete our review of your project. If we don't have a form for those properties that are 45 years old or older, then we'll send you a letter requesting additional information. And again, if there are new structures in your APE, how tall are they? With regard to the energy emergency, Executive Order 14156, we are accepting email submissions for that. However, we have some special rules. So I just want to provide this slide with that information. If the relevant federal agency has determined that your project complies with that executive order, we will accept email submittals for the OKSHPO, section 106 at history.ok.gov. And for OAS, they'll accept it. You need to send it to both oascap@ou.edu and to Katie Williamson at ou.edu. And make sure that your subject line includes national energy emergency, and make sure that you're submitting it as the federal, as the official with jurisdiction, the federal agency, or as a designated authority, delegated authority, somebody who has permission to submit a project to our office for Section 106 review. And if you have any questions about submitting a resource or a project, a Section 106 review under the energy emergency, please do feel free to reach out to our office, give me a call, and I'm happy to walk you through that. Okay, now I'm gonna hand it over to Mike.
All right. So as part of 106, we do have a few small requirements here, mainly the form that I'm going to go over here, and then photographs. Photographs, make sure that you're submitting current pictures that we can clearly see what the resource is that we're looking at. So on the HPR forms that you're going to fill out, and I'm going to go through these just kind of line by line. So your property name, your resource name, these can kind of be one and the same. It just depends on, if you have a special project, if it's just the name of a residence you want to throw in there, we're fine with that. Make sure the address is correct. Make sure that if it's in a city, that you have the correct address on there, which you can go down to line forward. You've got your city. If it's vicinity, if it's outside of city limits, you're going to want to put V, so we know that what we're looking at is outside of city limits. And then the rest is kind of basic. Number 4, number 5, number 6, county name. 7, 8, and 9, the lot, the block, the plat name. If it's outside of city limits, of course, you're not going to have this more often than not. Really, this is not something that we overly look at, but skip down to 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. To reiterate on what Kristina was saying, make sure you have good latitude and longitude coordinates on there. This is really helpful for us because we can pull it up directly on our map and not have to go through tons of the paperwork that you've sent in to just try and figure out where this location is. 15, 16, and 17, the UTM zone, the northings, the eastings, these are really not that important for a resource. If it's just a typical building, as long as you've got the latitude and longitude in there and we can find what it is that we're looking at. So getting into 18 and 19 and 20, this would almost be like if you're filling out an actual National Register nomination form. Your resource type, you're going to have either a building or it's going to be a district, an object, a site, or a structure. And then historic function. So what was the original intent of this building or this area or this site? Was it agriculture? Was it just architecturally related? Could it have been just a, historical, archaeological site, city hall, anything like that? You'll have on this HPR form, you'll have a lot to choose from. But then current function, what's it currently being used for? It's pretty self-explanatory. So 22, 23, 24, this is where it kind of gets into a little bit of confusion. 23, your description of significance. So we're not, I know it's misleading because of the language, we're not looking for you to describe what this resource looks like. We are looking for you to make a determination of eligibility on this. So if you're turning in a form for a building that is either currently listed on the National Register or through DOE, it was determined as a possibility of being listed eventually, or if there's absolutely no information on it, you're going to be making the call on it. Is this potentially eligible for listing on the National Register? Because when we get these forms, we're going to look at it and I'm going to determine on my end if it would be registered or if it's possibility, if it's a contributing resource, things like that. So again, it's a little misleading on the language, but you're making the call on this if it has not already been established through DOE, through our website, the various OLI that we have. And then 24, your documentation resource, you're just listing how you came about, your information, Google Earth, newspaper articles, things like that. And of course, 25, name of preparer, that's going to be you. If it's a survey project, yes or no. 26, what was that project's name? And then just dates of preparation. Do you have photographs, yes or no? You should have, should always be yes. And then the year of those photographs. They do have to be current and up to date. And then switching over to page 2 here. Your architect, your builder, this is, unless you're really digging into the research, this is really something that's pretty difficult to find. Most of the time, just unknown is okay with us. Year built, the county assessor website will typically have a rough estimate of the year that it's built. If not, you can find them on historic aerials. And then original site, typically yes, unless it was moved. If it was, then you're going to put the date moved. Where was the original site? And then 35, accessible. Can you physically see the property? Most often, yes. Architectural style, we know not everybody's an architect. Do your best estimate. Ranch, minimal traditional. If you click over on the right side of the HPR form, you will have several to choose from. Just get it close. We know you're not an architect, more than likely. 37, other architectural style. If you choose other, it could be something that's not on our list. We're okay with you writing in, what you think that style is. Your foundation material, your roof material. Most often foundation material is going to be concrete or stone, or even not at all. If it's a resource that is non-extant, you're not going to worry about filling any of this stuff out. And then skipping down to number 50, your condition of resource. So you're going to have your call again. Is it excellent? Is it good? Is it fair? Is it poor? Is it ruins? And then getting into 51, description of resource. So this is where you're going to describe what the property looks like. And our HPR forms are set up in a way that it's limited on how much you can put in to this little area, as well as on the comments. And then if you look down at 56, continuation sheet as well. So when you get to the third page is where you can add more descriptions. And so say if you're typing in on 51 and you run out of space, when you get to the third page here, the continuation, you would just put in 51 and then continue your information. And then again, on the right side, maps. For an HPRI form, it's a map is not necessary in some cases, but for a 106 review, we do request some sort of aerial map, just kind of detailing, especially if you have more than one resource, exactly which ones you're looking at, that we're looking at, so we kind of have an idea of where these are located in regards to each other. And then again, photographs. Make sure you have updated and clear photographs. Google Street View is typically not going to be allowed if it's not showing more than one access point or one elevation. So make sure you've got good pictures. We need to know what we're looking at. A lot of times Google Earth will not go to these resources or not give us a good, clear description of what we're looking at. So make sure you have good photographs. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Kristina to talk about archaeological site forms.
Thanks, Mike. And in this one, I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights, some common issues that we have on the site survey forms. I have included in the handouts an annotated archaeological site form with links in it that you could use if you're completing site forms. And I don't know if the folks who are actually here in the presentation today will be doing any of these site forms, but we'll go through this anyway. So starting on the first page, there's an option to indicate if a form is an update. If there's an existing site form for an archaeological site and you are the site's in your area of potential effect or you're doing additional work there, you will indicate that this is an update by clicking the drop-down box at the top right. Common problems that we see are that the UTMs get reversed, the northing and the easting get reversed. So I've provided a little clue here. The northing will be 7 digits and the easting will be 6 digits. Please, when you're entering the legal description, make sure that you are thinking of this as you would read this for quarter sections, you would read it as the say southeast quarter of the northeast quarter of the southwest quarter of section X, township X, range X. So you are starting from the smallest area and getting bigger. And if it's easier for you to start from a full section and work your way down, just work it in reverse. But if you remember to add those ofs, that's really helpful. So that's really all that I want to hit on page 1. On page 2, the site survey forms were developed quite some time ago. And so because of databases that the Archaeological Survey keeps, we're kind of at this time limited to the information that's available on this form um, as the numeric codes go. However, the form has a number of gaps, and cultural identification is a major gap on this form. So there are two options for a post-contact archaeological site. You can indicate that it's either protohistoric / historic Indian or that it's historic non-Indian. So if you if you're documenting a site and you have maybe it's a lithic scatter or not a lithic scatter, maybe it's a trash scatter, but you don't have integrity. You don't have features that are present or significant deposits, and so you're not doing the deed research that would get you to the answer to that question. You can check both of these, or you can make a note. Underneath it says, "How was cultural affiliation determined?" Please say no. No archival research was done. So there's the site form clearly indicates that that information is incomplete. Below, in historic phase identification, there are some glaring absences. Please just enter anything that's missing. Below, where it says how was historic information determined, you can check other. That's number 30, but enter uh, identify the cultural phase if you have another group that you can clearly identify, please enter it there, but also in the site description, be clear. And this is something that I do hope the site form will be improved in the near future, but as this is what we're working with right now, we'll just do the best that we can. Let's see. So on page 3, there are a number of date ranges. Again, this is just what we have with this form. So sometimes these date ranges don't make a whole lot of sense. Just do your best, but provide clear information about the occupation of the site, the time period during which the site was occupied in the description, and that's number 23. On page 4, under the description of cultural material, make sure that you're including thorough and clear discussions of the actual materials present at the site. Oftentimes, if this is not an eligible site, the site form is all that we're going to have to mark what was at this location. So clear and thorough descriptions of whatever artifacts are present are really critical. See. Number 23, which is page 7, so I'm jumping ahead here, is the description of the site. And this, again, all of this is this is just a copy of my annotated form that I'm showing you here. So you can have all of this information if you download the form at the right. But I do ask that you provide site dimensions and give them in relation to a known point, a landmark or coordinates. Please include how the site was identified and how you determined the boundaries. If this is a 106 review, indicate the site location in relation to the project's area of potential effect. Make sure you're telling us what the site represents. Is this a town, a farmstead, a battlefield, etc.? Identify and describe every site feature that you encounter within the site boundaries, and discuss the artifact deposits, discuss the context derived from historical maps, aerials, archival research, and personal communication. Oftentimes, the landowner will have information about a property, and that's information that you should include in the site form. Just note personal communication and who the landowner is so that they could potentially be reached in the future. Include names of property owners who are likely associated with the site's occupation. Um, for instance, include the patent recipient and allotment recipient, any identified property owners, chain of title information, and include references to archival data when applicable. So even if you're not going to the courthouse to research one of these sites, there is a lot of information that's easily accessible online. You can look at the Bureau of Land Management's website. You can look at the General Land Office maps and identify the land patents, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, or allotment, and include the names of those individuals. Then you can jump ahead to the 1936 WPA land ownership maps. Those are all available on the Oklahoma State University's website, their digital maps website. So you can check there, and then you can see if the same family seems to occupy that property or own that property. And that, even if you have no other information, that is helpful. Let's see, on the next page, 8, for subsurface testing, be sure that you're explaining whether any subsurface testing occurred. Did you do shovel tests? Did you do test units? Did you not? That's important information for anybody who's reviewing this site in the future. And then the biggest issues I think that we see with site survey forms are in the integrity and significance sections. So in order for a property to be eligible for the National Register, it has to have both significance and the integrity to communicate its significance. But these are two different things. So a property can be significant and just have no integrity. But oftentimes we'll see archaeological site forms that say there's no integrity because there's no significance, or there's no significance because there's no integrity. Please recognize that these are two separate questions and answer to the best of your ability for a site that you're documenting. I will say, in contrast with the HPRI forms, where we really want you to provide your recommendation of eligibility, uh, we want you to provide your recommendation of eligibility for a site form. But on page 10, where it says significant status, um, the actual determination will be made in consultation with the agency for a Section 106 project or through an official nomination. So if you are documenting a property, an archaeological site that you believe is eligible, please clearly state that throughout the site description and in the statements of integrity and significance. But here in the significant status, you will probably want to mark not assessed or considered eligible but not nominated by SHPO. Inventory site is typically used to indicate that a basic information about a site was documented during a survey, but inadequate investigations to determine eligibility. However, that has also been used at times to indicate a not eligible finding. So it's very confusing. Please do just be clear in your description in number 23 and in the statements of integrity and significance as to your recommendation for the eligibility of any of these properties. And if you're reviewing site forms that have been completed by others, please, take the markings and significance status with a grain of salt. Our office is maintaining, I am maintaining a database with the previous determinations of eligibility that are the result of Section 106 reviews for archaeological sites in the state. And so if you have questions, you can reach out to me about that, and I'll get that information to you. You can also review our National Register database and our determinations of eligibility to see if you can find archaeological sites in your project area that have been listed or determined eligible in the past. Under forthcoming reports on the site, please do include information that's going to help link this archaeological site survey form to any Section 106 review, including the date, the title of the report, the agency that the report was produced for, etc. If you already know of a file number that this project is associated, an OKSHPO file number or an OAS number. They also have keep a number from their own separate database. Please do include those numbers here. Anything that helps us to cross-reference this site form with the 106 review is it's really helpful. Maps. So for maps associated with archaeological sites, please do show the boundary of the site in red. Please include a location map. That would be on a topo, and that topo should be at 1 to 24,000 scale. That's a standard. That's what the printout will look just the same scale as if you were reviewing the OAS topo maps in their office. Clearly illustrate the boundary of your APE if this is a 106 project also, and make sure that you're including the project information on your map. So we know the project, we know the location, legal location especially, and county. And for a topo map, north is going to be up for these topo maps. So you don't have to have a north arrow. And a scale is also sort of optional on these, but it's just generally helpful to have a scale regardless on your maps. However, on the aerial, you should really include a north arrow, and you really should include a scale, despite the fact that this image that I've included on the right does not have one. Please do illustrate any features and their relation to one another and to the site boundaries, and illustrate shovel test locations, but especially positive shovel test locations. Those should be numbered so that the information associated with each of those positive shovel tests is recorded in the site form as well. And just to clarify, I made up these site locations. These are not real sites. This is in fact right outside of our office. Okay, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Mike for National Register nomination form.
All right, one more fun form, kids. So I'm going to walk you through basically just the essentials of filling out a National Register nomination form. Page 1 is pretty self-explanatory. Got your name of your property, the location, if we're publishing it or not. We do that in case it's a protected archaeological site. State federal agency certification, so that's basically for us to fill out. This will be for TIPO signatures, SHPO signatures, and then on page 2, number 4 is for the National Park Service once they have determined it eligible or not. And then you get to number 5, classification. So is this private? Is it public? Is it a state property, federal property? Most of the time it's private property. And then what are we looking at here? Are we nominating a building, a district, a site, a structure, or an object? And here's an example of a filled out form from the Capitol Hill district that we did a few years back. And And then moving on to the next page. So we're getting into what resources, how many, descriptions, their historic functions. And again, here's an example of Capitol Hill. So this was a district, which means there were more than one resource. So you can see we had 39 contributing and 14 non-contributing. Before it can be considered eligible for the National Register, you have to have at least 50% or more contributing to the actual district. You can't have objects and structures along with this. For example, the object was the entrance sign going into Capitol Hill. It was considered historic. And then functions are used, number 6. So this is where on our determination of eligibility, what is it significant for in history? So Capitol Hill was several. We have commerce, also social. There's religious facilities, recreation and cultures in there. There's also domestic housing, and then the landscaping features. And then current functions, it hasn't changed too much, so you can still see there's still commerce, religious facilities. There's education was added, the schools that came along. We also added vacant, and then some that were still in progress. And then number 7, your description. So this is where you're giving your architectural description of the building or buildings. This could be, you can see here late 19th and 20th century American movements. It could be bungalow, craftsman, organic, on and on. And then your materials, the principal material was obviously brick because that's what the majority of the downtown businesses are built out of. And then your narrative description, your summary paragraph. So section 7 and section 8 are basically the meat and potatoes of your nomination. Your summary paragraph in section 7, this is where you're going to be describing the architectural significance. Even if you're nominating something for something that's not architecturally related, but if it's still a house, something like that has to do with a famous person, you're still going to have to describe the architecture of that building. And so section 7 is where this takes place. And then moving into section 8, your statement of significance. So this is what criteria are we using? Is it A, B, C, or D? And then your considerations. So these can be for something that's not 50 years of age or older, or a religious institution, a cemetery, a commemorative property. These do happen from time to time. If we nominate a church, obviously you're going to have a criteria consideration as a religious institution. And here's a little better example of section 7. For a district, you are describing every building. So even if it's commercial or residential, you're going to go through and describe the architectural style of each resource. And then what's not on here that the National Park Service recently has started asking for is you're also going to list if it is a contributing resource or a non-contributing resource. So if you can see section 7, page 6, right there in the middle, number 2, 114 Southwest 25th Street. They give the architectural description and then a brief exterior description. You would also need to put on that first line contributing or non-contributing. And then getting into section 8, your areas of significance. This is where you're going to be making your argument of why this resource or these resources are eligible for the National Register. So for example, for Capitol Hill, we use community planning, development, and commerce. The period of significance is typically, if it's a single house, when it was built. For this, it's a district. So the first one was established in 1910, and then the cutoff date was 1974. So this, at the time, would have been the 50-year time frame. You've got significant dates that you'll throw in there, and again, it depends on the resource. This can be anything from, again, the build date. If there were alterations that came into the district at some point or another, if you're using a house that was owned by somebody famous in history, you would be looking at when they were in that area, when they were in that house, and anything significant as far as dates related to it. And then architecture builder, of course, you're going to need to name that. And then getting into section 8, your statement significance. Again, this is where you're making your argument. Why is this eligible for the National Register of Historic Places? This is a scholarly paper. As you can see, you need footnotes, you need endnotes. At the end, you're going to have a bibliography. You need primary sources. It has to be written scholarly to where it makes the argument, again, of why this should be recognized on the National Register. And then number 9 is where you're going to add your bibliography. And here's a good example again, using primary resources. And then geographical data. Obviously, if you only have one resource, you're not going to have several latitude, longitude coordinates. There were several added in this because you're given the boundary description of it. And then your acreage property type, this was 17 acres total with the boundary. And on this last page on the right, again, you can see verbal boundary description and boundary justification. So you're just explaining if it's a property, if it's a single house, typically it's just going to be the lot. Very simple argument. And then prepared by, so whoever's doing this form. Here's a kind of a clear picture of the boundary justification. So getting into this is kind of where National Park Service has recently made a few changes, especially with the photographs. So at the end of a nomination form, you're going to have to provide a photo map showing the direction that each picture was taken. And then you're also going to have a continuation sheet where you're going to include your maps, etc., like that. Why is it? Okay. Yeah, so here's your continuation sheet. Sorry, my clicker wasn't working. These are going to be, as you can see on the left, your boundary justification. You're giving your description of, in this case, the Capitol Hill District in downtown Oklahoma City, south side of Oklahoma City. They clearly have their boundary marked in green, and then all their coordinates are also justified on that. These go at the end of the nomination. In the middle there is a example of a photo key that you have to include. This is showing where the person was standing and what direction the camera was facing whenever they were taking these pictures. They also included a historic image. You can add historical images. You can add anything to these continuation sheets that is going to help bolster why this is historically significant. It doesn't have to be just maps. It can be, if you have newspaper articles from back, when this period of significance was established, you can include that. And then last, photographs. These are now submitted separately. I like to do them as a PDF portfolio. It's the easiest way to organize them. But now we are not adding those to the end of the nomination. Park Service has changed just recently their photo submittals, and they want them separate because they're pulling them to add to their website. This is Yukon, a recent survey that we did of the downtown Yukon survey area, and you can kind of see that when we were taking these photographs, especially in a district, you're naturally going to have buildings side by side next to each other. So you're doing street view photos, make sure they're clear photos. They do have to be JPEG or TIFF, something of high resolution. Most camera phones are today have pretty high resolution, but they do have to be formatted through JPEG or TIFF so that we can submit those to the National Park Service. And I believe that concludes our little, oops. Yep. So, Ms. Wyckoff.
Well, as you said, that's about all that we've got for today. And so we really appreciate everyone's attendance.